More or less at the same time as everybody else that hadn't yet made the jump, the Swedes around 1940 realized that a modern tank needed a slightly more powerful weapon than a 37mm, such as was fitted onto the L-60, which at the time made up the bulk of the Swedish armored forces. As a result, in May 1941, an urgent requirement was issued. It basically said, we want a modern tank with a bigger gun, we need it fast, and it can't weigh more than 22 ton. In order to meet this requirement, Landsverk took a look at their 18-ton Lago prototype, filled with it a little bit, and ended up with the Stridsvagn M42. Now, we've already looked at an M42 in California. It was a snapshot, we didn't have much time. So here we are at Arsenalen in Sweden, and we're going to take a little bit more time to view the M42 in a bit more detail. Now, I have to start off by mentioning that this isn't actually a true M42. None exist left in the world. They have all been backdated from other versions of tanks to one degree or another. Now, this is one of the better ones, but as we go around, we'll be pointing out a couple of the features that were removed or modified in its subsequent life, in this case as an IKV-73. The design of the tank is very narrow, and this was mandated by the Swedish strategic requirements. Sweden is a very long country. It's a better part of 2,000 kilometers from one end to the other, and the infrastructure wasn't fantastic, which meant that 22-ton weight limit was pretty hard. In order to keep the weight of the tank down, you make a narrower tank, and thus you have less metal. Now, of course, the problem is narrower tanks become harder to steer, they become top-heavy. This is one of those compromises that they had to go through. Armour on the vehicle is about 55mm on the vertical facing slopes. The glacis is more like 3 centimeters. You see the headlight front and center. There's a low visibility convoy light here. One of the first differences between an M42 and what it became is the lack of a machine gun here. There was never actually a machine gun position, there was just a machine gun, and so its loss was not really significant, and it was replaced by the stowage bin to the front. You will also see the cooling louvers for the steering and braking system behind these rather heavy plates, which I'm going to lift up and show you the lubrication points. So as I open up the louvers, you can see under here the grille and a lubrication point. Let me just pull this out here. And you can have a better view of the steering braking system. For routine lubrication, of course, you won't have to pull this out. You have all the grease fittings here with piping that goes throughout the system. You see the main brakes are on the outside, and there's the steering system. It's a little bit further inboard. Now, if you wanted to actually pull this out for maintenance, it's a little bit of a nuisance. You gotta pull off the tracks, the sprocket wheel, the final drive, and some of the brake assembly, and everything else has gotta go up through the tank and out where the turret would go, so you've obviously got to pull the turret as well. So hopefully they made these things very reliable. All right, so that was the steering system. Let's close it up carefully. By the way, one additional note, forgot to mention, the low-vis light here is another post-war modification for the IKV series. So as you come around to the running gear on the side, you have a look firstly at the 6 large road wheels per side. Now, this is all one single casting with just a little divider in between the two. Makes it all very heavy, and I can understand why they made spokes instead of a solid piece of metal. I mean, you've got to be able to lug the thing around for maintenance. Lubricated by grease, there's little grease fittings all over the place, shock absorbers, you saw them at the front. The track is of a single pin cast type. It is held in place by little caps. So you put the pin in, you put a little cap in, you hammer the cap, it squishes out and it holds it in place. I'm told it's pretty good. If you want a brake track, you use a punch pin and you simply punch the pin out, the cap will fall off and you can go on. You can see the torsion bars are mounted with the right-hand side a little bit forward, so the left-hand side torsion bar is anchored to the rear, giving that traditional offset that you get on a torsion bar vehicle. And finally, you can also see the very large sprocket wheel at the front, and it fits in with the same design philosophy you'd seen over the years of the Swedish tanks with the smaller, lower idler to the rear. Moving on to the upper side hull, the armour is between 25 to 30 millimeters thick, and as you can see, slightly sloped. A couple of other modification identifiers. The wire reel used for communication when the tanks were in static positions, let's say overnight logger, that used to be a spare road wheel, now just one is mounted. And there's reinforcing also on the turret doors. Quite what it was that they expected that would require that extra reinforcing that they were going to get shot at with, I'm not entirely sure. And finally, we have mounting points for various Pioneer tools. So we move around to the back of the vehicle. A couple of other IKV type modifications. The infantry telephone is new. The handrails for dismountable infantry are also new. Not new, however, are all the spare track links here, and this tool, which is basically like a large socket wrench, and it is used to tension the track by attaching onto the end of the idler arm screw, and by sheer force of manual effort is extended or retracted. Also, you can find down beneath here the two exhaust pipes and the tow hooks. Just before I get on up, a couple of observations on the turret rear. Firstly, a matter of some mystery is just how you get the spare road wheel up onto the side of the turret. We looked it up, it weighs 190 kilograms. It's coming on to about 1/5 of a ton, and that's quite a weight to have to hoist up there. The other point on the rear is a machine gun mount, and there was obviously no dedicated rear machine gunner, and when the vehicle was being designed, it looked like they had a very American mentality of machine guns everywhere you can put it, and it doesn't really matter if you have manpower to man them. So let's get up and have a look at the engine. I will say getting up onto the side of the tank is very easy. That is not going to work because I'm standing on it. This is a heavy bugger. Stay. Two-man job ordinarily. So under the long sloping engine deck, which is perfectly designed to allow you to slide off in wet and snowy weather, you'll find one of two different types of engine. The majority of the tanks were built with the Scania Vabis 603. This was a twin motor, which combined cranked out a reasonably respectable 324 horsepower. About 60 vehicles, however, were built with this, the Volvo A8B, which cranked out a very good 380 horsepower. The catch was that this particular engine was not very reliable. Now, depending on which variant of engine you had, that changed the designation of the vehicle a little bit. So the vehicles with the twin engine had a T designator, and the vehicles with the single Volvo had an E designator. Also visible under here, you can see the points for the coolant, air cleaners on each side, and on the very far forwards, you can also see the fuel tanks. About 350 liters of fuel were carried, officially methyl 25. In actuality, had all sorts of combinations of ethanol, methanol, gasoline, with variations of ratio going from 25-75 one way to 75-25 going the other way. All told, the vehicle was ready to go about 150 kilometers on a single tank of fuel. And thus ends the tour of the outside of the tank. Well, we'll be back in part 2 to go inside.